Hi, so we're on episode 3. My name's Christina Heimstead, and I'm here to talk about money. Money as a tool, making money work for you. We work really hard to get it, to pay our bills and do whatnot. It'd be nice to have it do something other than just pay our bills. So this week I'm here to talk about interest. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this is the Fed has adjusted interest rates recently. I believe it was a couple weeks ago. Hypothetically, could be the reason that the Dow dropped by 800 points in a day. When I looked middle of the day today, it had dropped by what appeared to be about 1,000 points. Off of about 26.4 down to 25.4. That's 26,000 points down to 25,000 points. And Trump responded basically saying that the Fed is killing the market. And obviously hypothetically, the Fed's goal is to slow economic growth and keep a slow, steady pace, as opposed to hypothetically sending us spiraling back into some sort of recession again. So I'm going to try my best to talk about and or explain how that more or less works. In other news, real estate locally is pretty quiet. Something I've been at least writing about or having conversations about is we appear to be having kind of this weird perfect storm of tax legislation that started at the beginning of the year, rising interest rates, and rising inventory. It's one thing to kind of slow it down, but it seemed it could also be the time of year, summer's over, and there certainly is a seasonality to real estate, but this seems to... I'll be curious to see what the reports indicate, but in terms of that first feeling, in terms of what the reports will come out at for September as well as October, will be interesting to see if they match sentiments. I never like to go based on feels. In part because I had somebody walk into an open house years ago telling me that they just felt like we were going to hit another downturn, that we were due to correct. This must have been at least 3 years ago, probably closer to 4, counting this based on which car I was driving. And obviously the market has grown significantly from then. And even at the time I asked him and said, hey, what's going to trigger it? Because there's always something in after the fact where we all say we've got, had we had 2020, we would have seen it. So, if it's X number of years down the road and you've got 2020, what is it that triggered it? His theory was the car industry. I think, at least from reports that I've read, it wasn't until this past 3 months or so that I've seen that light vehicle sales have not reached new highs. So that, and he said it was lending rates for those, but there doesn't seem to be much muscle behind that statement, especially given the fact that that was 3 or 4 years ago now. Maybe he was just 3 or 4 years too early. Reports don't seem to indicate that, but anyways, going back to other things to note. So interest rates, definitely not something that you learn in school, and something you learn down the road, and maybe don't fully grasp what it all means. Bottom line is that if somebody lends you money for something, for either to go to school, to get a house, to get a car, sometimes you get a construction loan, Sometimes you get a personal loan. Somebody wants something in return for letting you borrow the money. Typically, that's interest. And it's usually a percentage based on how much they gave you, or I shouldn't say that. It's typically an overall percentage calculated from the loan. So, for instance, if you buy a home, we'll just say hypothetically you get $1 million loan to go buy some house for 1.5 or something or other. And you do a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, which is a pretty standard loan that a lot of people like to get. You're going to calculate that math. So you'll do the $1 million over 30 years. But then the bank's going to want interest on top of that. So interest rates, I believe, are floating around mid-4s right now, depending on how much you're putting down. Oftentimes, if you don't put as much down, the bank wants a slightly higher interest rate. That's another thing that we will go over. Real quick to grab a calculator. Okay. Sorry, Max. Got my dog here with me. If we are to do $1 million, say, for the sake of numbers, we'll just make it easy and do 1.04 interest rate. And music came on, that's good. So we said 0.045 interest rate. So that's a 4.5% interest rate. So times 1.045. So that gets you to, there we are, $1,045,000. Over the course of 30 years. So you're looking at about just shy of $35,000 per year. Everybody, of course, always wants to do that on a per monthly basis. Then you divide it by 12. That gets you to a grand total of, there we go, $2,900. So, as opposed to, say you had $1 million in the bank and you gave yourself a loan with 0% interest. Get you down to $2,777. So decreases slightly. It brings you down just under that. The 4.5% interest rate increases your monthly cost by about $125 a month. So 4.5%, that's pretty solid still. It's when things get closer to 10% or what have you that it makes a difference. But also the difference between $1 million and $1,045,000, maybe not too terribly significant. That's why when negotiating for purchasing a home and people are talking about that last $5,000, that last whatever bit, typically it's not going to prevent somebody from getting a house, and it's just that little bit. I mean, I remember one of the first deals I did, and we were talking about, that last $5,000. Like, probably going to work out to be like a cup of coffee once a month, maybe two. Like, in the grand scheme of things, not a massive hit. But maybe it's a sense of pride. So, and everybody does it for different reasons. But in the same token, it's why interest rates can be really valuable, is understanding some of these things. I think when it becomes most significant is, to me, this is when understanding money as a tool becomes most powerful. For instance, And it's truly because the interest rates for these different products tend to vary. So when I say interest rates for different products, I mean home loans versus construction loans versus student loans versus personal loans versus something else, like hard money lending, what have you. And they all, or even business loans. Somebody told me recently that they got a business loan at 8% interest rate. But oftentimes you get to a certain point where maybe you're sitting down, deciding to go over all your finances and everything, and you're thinking about, okay, a lot of people have student debt. College is expensive. There are fewer credits these days, and it's getting more and more expensive, especially if you choose to go in California where the dirt has just gotten more expensive, and a lot of those costs gets forwarded through in rent or what have you. So that one's a hard one. Or I once spoke with someone who, he and his wife had gotten married. They had this really big, extravagant wedding, and it was great, except it put them really behind the 8 ball. So it put them in a lot of debt, which not the end of the world, but good on them. They sat down and kind of did the math and figured out, okay, like the interest rates on the credit cards that we're paying that we used for the wedding are at X percent, whereas we can go get a personal loan at Y percent and reduce the cost of our debt. For example, credit cards typically, I mean, I've got one that has a 5% interest rate, but I've never seen that repeated. I think the others are closer to 20 to 30. I think I've got one that's at like 18. But at 20%, 25%, from what I've seen, is pretty standard. One of the things that I recommend for something like that and keeping track of maybe who is going to provide you a really good interest rate is to look at things like Credit Karma or other resources like that. Helps you keep track of your credit. And that's something we can talk about at a different date. But the power of the interest rate. So for instance, if they had $50,000 worth of debt and they were paying 30% interest on that, to go from 30% interest to 10%, let's do the math real quick. 50 times 1.3. So at 30% interest rate, hypothetically, depending that's what they were paying, you end up, over the course of the term of the loan, whatever that might be, you end up paying $65,000. And to calculate this math, it's really just the $50,000, which is the money that you took out, times 1.3. So 1 is to account for just you're giving the money back, and the 0.3 accounts for the 30% interest rate. So the bank wants 30% on top of what they gave you in return. And that's what makes the world go round. So that's $65,000, and say, you're doing this over the course of 10 years. I mean, these can be a lot more flexible. I mean, obviously credit cards are more or less ongoing, and it's just a monthly fee, annual fee as time goes on. But if this were done in the course of a loan, it would be $541.67. Whereas if you had that $50,000 and you took out that personal loan, so not using credit cards and the 30% interest rate on terrible credit card interest, terrible because I personally have 20s range for I think most of them. Obviously everybody's going to be different, but anything north of 30 is awfully high for a credit card. Like, you better be getting some crazy mileage or points or something in exchange for that, and then pay it all off. Don't incur that interest. That's why we're talking about this. So $50,000 at a 10% interest gets you to $55,000. So that's $10,000 less because your interest rate is 20% lower. I mean, again, if you're doing this over the course of 10 years, you're at $458 a month. So, I mean, you're reducing your monthly cost by almost $100 a month. There are things like that when I think about it. That's why it's valuable to know about interest, because that extra $100 in your pocket every month could pay for your utilities, could pay for having a dog, or dog food, or it could just be a trip or something or other that you get to do. Maybe you put it aside for 6 months and then decide that you're going to go snowboarding or do something cool. It makes a huge difference when trying to figure out manage your finances. So, for instance, if you have a school loan, credit card debt, and all this other stuff, and it's preventing you from doing other cooler things. I mean, or taking that money and investing it. I mean, because at that point in time, that $100 just, you don't have it. It's gone. It's poof. Somebody else took it from you. For you to not do your homework and realize that you could keep that $100 and put it towards something else, it breaks my heart every time I hear this story. And I always talk to people about this. Or for instance, there's a forum and podcast that I participate in, used to participate a lot more heavily, less so now, called Bigger Pockets. And this is a question that used to come up a lot. People would ask, should I pay off my student debt? Should I pay off my home loan? What should I do? And I was floored that people could not answer this question themselves. The first thing I'd always say is, what has the higher interest rate? Chances are it's not your home loan. Banks like lending on properties. It's probably what got us into the recession in the first place. But obviously they're not doing subprime lending anymore. And they're not requiring that you just fog a mirror. In order to get a loan, you actually have to put some money down. And it used to just blow my mind. I'm not 100% sure what most student loan interest rates are. But bottom line is, if they're at a higher interest rate than your home loan, yeah, pay that one off. Reduce that debt, because the interest rate on that accruing in contrast to the interest rate on your home loan, and the difference that reaches over the course of 30 years or however long it takes you to pay off your student debt, astronomically different. And it could have a drastic difference in how you manage your life and are empowered to do different things. And doing your homework and just really looking at, keeping the loans that have the lowest interest rate in contrast to the ones that have higher interest rates. I mean, if this $100 difference over the course of 10 years per month, in the format of credit card debt versus a personal loan, doesn't demonstrate it, it's so powerful. I mean, for as much as maybe everyone disliked math in school, outside of a few token mathematicians, most of the time numbers are pretty dry. There's no flexibility with it. It's just, this is what the number is. And it always breaks my heart to see that people don't do that homework with interest rates, because it just makes such a difference. And it's important to do homework in terms of, okay, so there are personal loans, there's credit card debt, there's construction loans, student loans, business loans. Anytime you've borrowed money for whatever reason, chances are there's interest on it. Now, maybe if you borrow money from family or a friend, it's not there, but it's usually there, and you got to pay it back, and trying to figure out which one's which is important. And I mean, that's another thing that you typically see when you open a credit card. They'll talk to you about transfer balances and what that means, and what's the cost of doing such a thing. And the reason they have to mention it is because their interest rate might be at one point, but another credit card might be at another point. So even so, sometimes depending on the credit card, sometimes it makes sense to move your debt from credit card A that has a 30 interest rate to move that debt to credit card B, which maybe has a 20% interest rate, if you can't pay it all off in one fell swoop. Makes a huge difference. It's like that 5%. I always, outside of maybe one time, always pay off my credit cards that month. Don't carry any debt because it just doesn't make any sense for me personally. Really the reason why I have my credit cards is to manage my credit score. Like I said, conversation for another day. But the reason I keep that 5% interest rate credit card, it doesn't really do much of anything for me. I don't get points, I don't get miles, I don't get anything cool in terms of benefits. Really, it just is there for an emergency as far as I'm concerned, such that if for whatever reason I got into a pickle and needed to be able to carry some debt, I could carry it at a 5% interest rate instead of the 20. And we already looked at what a difference of 10% makes. Or 20%, sorry. If 15% is not that different, it's brutal. And it's part of the reason why Trump is so pissed about the Fed increasing interest rates. I mean, like I said, it slowed the market down. So, 5 years ago, you could get loans at south of 4% interest rates. You can comfortably do 3.5%, 3.75% interest rate for your home loan. But as the Fed increases rates, it increases your interest rate. So it reduces the purchasing power that you have. Like I just said, so if that $50,000 loan that you want to take on to buy a home, the payment was at $55,000, you have maybe it's easier to pay off that loan. So, it's just because it reduces your monthly cost. So in terms of qualifying somebody, in terms of what they can afford on a monthly basis, it improves that drastically, so that they build that extra $100 back into the loan. So rather than the capped at 55, they can give you more. It maybe the better way to demonstrate that is it works more backwards. So if the goal is to pay off the $50,000, right, and one has the 10% interest, whereas the other has the 20% interest, because it's easier to pay off the 50 grand with the 10% interest, they can give you a little more, because really what they're calculating is what you can afford on a monthly basis. So that, say you've got, what did we say it was, $450 a month at the 55, at the 10% interest rate, so $450. What they can do is, if all else is equal with the interest rate and everything, and really what they're trying to target is a $500 monthly cost going to them. They can allow you to, they can build in that extra $50 per month into the loan and expand that 50 grand to maybe $55,000. Because if they do the math all over again, then they back you into that $500 a month. For instance, I remember when I got my last car, the salesman, not my favorite, kept calling me, kept more or less trying to back me into what I could afford. So he's focused on the affordability, not what I wanted, assuming that was how I was going to do things. So he kept asking me, what can I afford? What can I afford? What can I afford? And I didn't care about what I could afford. I cared more about the right car for me, because at that point, I was pretty comfortable getting whatever car I wanted. It was just within means. It'd be cool to be driving some really fancy car or whatever, but I'm pretty minimalist as a person. So, but he didn't understand that I was trying to keep my money and maneuver things appropriately, and didn't want to back into what I could afford the way that a bank does when you go to buy a home. Not that that's a bad thing when you go to buy a home, but that's more or less what they're doing is that based on your monthly income, based on the interest rates that we have, and what type of loan you want, whether it's a 7-to-1 adjustable rate mortgage or a 30-year fixed rate mortgage or a 10-year fixed rate mortgage, whatever it is that you choose to do. They will back you into a payment more or less, and they have their formulas for how they make it work, and what they're comfortable with. And obviously you can always talk to other banks and see what they can or cannot do. But that's more or less kind of how that works. But yeah, it's why Trump's coming out pissed at the Fed for increasing interest rates. It's typically when that happens, a lot of people, it reduces the purchasing power, because bank is basically saying, well, we have to pay more to the Fed or whoever, and as a result of that, we can't give you as much because the interest rates are higher. So Trump is blaming the Fed for the stock market hit. Like I said, so it generally puts people in a position to kind of slow down, stop, take their money, take stock of everything, and reevaluate kind of how they want to allocate a lot of their funds. And we see this a lot where, after the Fed does something like this, it can have an impact on our market that way. One of the other things too, real quick to touch on about interest rates, especially when it comes to home loans, is PMI. Sometimes bank can give you more money with less money down, but in exchange they ask for PMIs. It's referred to as premium mortgage insurance. Basically, it's just an additional cost that they ask you to pay until you get to what is more typical, which is your 20% down interest, or 20% down payment. So for instance, if you can structure something such that you put 5% down because you can qualify for that type of loan, but you don't maybe have the cash in your pocket at that point in time, you can do the 5% down, but then you have to pay an additional premium, which is where premium mortgage insurance comes from, towards that 20%. So depending on what position you're in, maybe that's attractive to you, maybe it's not. It all just depends on more or less what your needs are and what's going on. But I think it's really important to get a better understanding of of what the interest rates are on everything. Because if you're burning money paying a credit card bill that's got 30% interest, and you're paying that debt slowly instead, and you've chosen to pay off your student loan, which has an interest rate of say 8%, it could be really doing yourself a disservice. Even though, good job paying off loans, it behoove you to, if money is that tight, to take a second, take a look at everything and determine the interest rate on this loan is far cheaper. Let's keep that one, pay off this one instead, because this one is hurting the bottom line more aggressively. And just keep, and I mean, sometimes you can even call some of these institutions and say, hey, like, this is what's going on. Can we talk about renegotiating this? Not flexible all the time. By no means do I want to say that that's really an option all the time, but it depends, and it doesn't hurt. doesn't hurt to try to refinagle the situation. Hopefully this helps. Hopefully everybody can reevaluate things and make their money work for them better. Nothing more painful than watching someone pay too high an interest rate, and it breaks my heart. That's one of the things that frustrates me the most, because like I said, everybody works really hard to do what they can and to get the money that they do have, but it's important to not be giving it away for some reason just because you didn't do your homework. One of the things I was thinking about recently is that, it's supposed to be America, land of opportunity where you can do what you want to do, which to a large extent hopefully is still true, but it's important to recognize that if that's what we're doing, it's important to be aware of how you're managing things. And I know that this can be time consuming. Again, I recommend resources like, I personally use Credit Karma, but there are plenty of other credit sites. You can just Google them. Part of the reason why I like Credit Karma is they'll give you your score, they'll update it weekly, they give recommendations and things. And it's not always perfect. It's not always 100% accurate. I mean, my brother as a lender will oftentimes say that, maybe you think that your credit score is this, but when we actually go to run your credit to give you a loan, it comes up maybe a little differently. So it's not 100%, but they're all just resources. And it's not a perfect science. None of this ever is, but hopefully it gets everybody a little closer to being a little more financially successful and being a little empowered to do what you want to do and get that independence and manage things the way you want to manage it. Whether it's like my friend who quit everything, traveled, and now lives in Germany, and it's pretty cool. It's because she managed her money well. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to go about things, and no one should be stopped from being able to do that. The other thing I've thought about recently is this massive gap between the whole I remember the concept of like the 1%ers and the extreme hatred for all of that, but rather than it being some sort of massive secret, or the concept behind doctors, lawyers, and business executives, I know too many people who own small businesses that are really successful and really profitable. This doesn't have to be rocket science. And it's important to learn about some of this. I know a lot of us think you go to school, you get a good education, and you get a good job. But it doesn't teach you about some of this stuff, and this is the stuff that can kind of sometimes be the difference between thinking that you have to turn the lights off when you're not in the room to, taking a really cool vacation somewhere that you want to go. Or being able to provide more financial security for your family, kids, or what have you. Or even yourself in retirement and being able to retire earlier. There's no limitations on kind of what you can do that way. It's just a matter of structuring things better for you and the lifestyle that you want. And like I said, I don't think this needs to be some massive secret. I feel like we all talk about politics and at length, and that's something tangible and accessible, and everybody wants you to participate and do what you can that way. Don't think money should be any different. CNBC doesn't have to just be for the 1%ers. We all have it, we all use it, we all do something with it and participate to some extent with it. We owe it to ourselves to learn more about it and to really achieve that, land of opportunity concept and do what you want to do. But a lot of that comes from this understanding. You know, it's like I said, the first go around, there are very few people who just show up and are like, yeah, here's $10 million. You're super cool. You're awesome at whatever it is that you do. So for the rest of us, we got to figure this out. And I don't think it has to be some massive secret. I think it can be tangible. It just takes some homework. So not sure what we'll talk about next week. I know I said I wanted to make this a little more lowbrow. Interest rates, I think, are pretty tangible. I think a lot of us participate with these, but maybe we'll do something like credit scores next week. Anyways, thanks for watching. My name's Christina Heimstead, here to talk about money, and hopefully share with everybody such that there isn't a massive gap and that we can all live the lives that we want to live. See you next time. Thanks. Bye.